Hello, this is professional photographer Nathan Smith, and this is a hopefully quick tutorial on how to set up your Wacom preferences on like an Intuos 5 or an Intuos Pro for Lightroom and for Photoshop. Now, I've seen a lot of tutorials on setting it up for just Photoshop, but for those of us who use Lightroom and Photoshop, I hadn't really seen anything that I liked, and so I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, forgive my messy desk here, but this is how I have my desk set up. But if you look at this, I used to have a bamboo tablet, and I am right-handed. And before I got the tablet, the way my desk is set up, because it's a small desk, I have to have my MacBook Pro to my right. And then I have a 24-inch Apple monitor in front of me, and I am right-handed, and I've gotten really, really good with the trackpad on the MacBook Pro, and so doing editing on the MacBook Pro was okay. And then I got the bamboo tablet, and the only problem was with my pen to the tablet with my right hand. You can see it's very awkward for me to reach across with my left hand and do keyboard commands on the MacBook Pro. I felt like I was playing Twister. So, and the tips I'm going to give will work on a one monitor system, but I would highly recommend, if you're using Lightroom, do a two monitor system. As you can see here, Lightroom is just naturally set up for a two monitor system. If you go down here, you'll notice where my mouse is here. You see the two. You can turn that second monitor on and off with a click of a button, but Lightroom, since version I think 3, is designed for two monitors. And one very quick tip to fly through your edits in Lightroom: if you set yourself up with two screens like this, you can even do this with one screen, engage your cap locks key, and then as soon as you give a photo a numerical rating, it will pop up the next photo. And if you're using a two monitor system, the nice thing is you can see your grid of all your photos, but you also get a full resolution view of an image. So you can see, for example, someone's eyes are closed, where you wouldn't be able to see that maybe in the thumbnail. So, you can get a second monitor for like $150. So I would highly recommend a two monitor system. Now, I am doing this on a Mac, but most of what I'm going to teach you will apply to Windows. The other thing is, I am on an Intuos Pro SMALL tablet, and two Photoshop experts, Matt Klaskowski, who is kind of Scott Kelby's right-hand man, and Aaron Nace, N-A-C-E, of Flern.com, they both use and recommend the SMALL tablet, because your hand doesn't have to travel so far if you are a photographer. Now, if you're a painter or something, then yes, you might want, if you're drawing with your whole arm, then a medium or a large tablet might work for you. But Aaron Nace, for example, actually uses a portion of the SMALL tablet to cover his whole screen. Okay, but anyway, jumping right in on how to do this. I've seen many, many different ways of doing this. But if we go up here to Preferences, and you go down and you open up, now I'm assuming you have the Wacom tablet software installed, and what you should do is go to Wacom.com and download the latest driver. This tutorial is effective as of January 2014. Now, I have actually discovered a bug in the software. I've communicated this with Wacom. They said, yes, let me turn on my tablet. So I turn on my tablet, and there is so I have erased all my settings to show you how to do this from scratch. Now, these are the default settings, and then if I take my pen and touch it to the tablet, then the pen shows up. So now this is the default setting when you very first load up the latest Wacom driver. Now, you notice these settings are set for all, and what amazes me is I've seen several tutorials by prominent people who have set up their Wacom tablet for Photoshop using the all setting. The problem is, if you're using Lightroom and Photoshop, you're going to want different settings for Lightroom than you are for Photoshop. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. The beautiful thing about the Wacom tablet is it automatically senses whatever software that you're currently working with. Now, I have Lightroom opened on my computer, but I deliberately did not open Photoshop yet, and I'm going to show you something. I'm going to open Photoshop, CC, and when it comes up, you notice it already, now Photoshop CC has popped into the application menu. Lightroom, unfortunately, doesn't pop in. But the settings that I'm going to show you, okay, Photoshop is now booted up. And for now, I'm going to hide Photoshop. Okay, so we're back to here. All right, so I'm going to show you settings based on the default Wacom settings for Photoshop CC. Now, on a medium or large tablet, you have 8 express keys instead of 6. And so I'm going to show you how to get the functionality of the 8 keys on a 6-key Intuos Pro SMALL. Okay? So you'll notice if I switch between all other programs in Photoshop CC, you notice these settings: touch on off settings, shift, command, option, pan scroll. That's what Wacom has set up for the default settings for these items. However, if I click, you watch what happens when I click to Photoshop, you'll notice that these settings here now change to command option Z, for which is multiple undos, which you want in Photoshop. This top key here is for option, the radial menu, which is extremely useful because that gives you a whole bunch of extra settings, and the space bar, which of course you want when you're using a tool and you want to then grab your screen and move it to a different part of the photo to use the same tool. So I'm basing the settings on the default settings for Photoshop CC. However, we're going to make some adjustments here. So, one other thing, on the Intuos Pro and on the Intuos 5, personally, I love the touch settings because I can actually set the pen to only be on my main monitor here, but then I can set the touch settings to go to both monitors. So, for example, if I have a grid over here in Lightroom, I can go click on a photo, but then go back and click and use the pen only mapped to the large screen. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so, but there's a couple settings on the medium. For example, there's what's called precision mode, which is very useful for doing detail work, and you don't get that when you use a small tablet. So I'm going to show you how to get that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, first of all, I want to show you something. If we go over here to touch, and the standard gestures here are, these are the standard gestures on a Macintosh with a trackpad. And then there's the My Gestures, which are gestures that Wacom has added for the Wacom tablet. And you'll notice here on the 5-finger setting, if you swipe down with 5 fingers, you get the settings menu. So what that means is I can now change the settings to something else because I can get my settings swiping down with 5 fingers, and that's not something the settings is not something I'm going to need a lot. But if you're using Lightroom, what you're going to need to do is you're going to be switching between Lightroom and Photoshop frequently. Okay, so if I'm in Photoshop, for example, I have finished editing a photo, what I want to do is I want to then go back to Lightroom. So I'm choosing here Adobe Photoshop Lightroom 5. I hit open. And then I personally change the name up here because it's too long. Open Lightroom 5. Okay. So now this button here will automatically open Lightroom 5. The other thing that I like is the precision mode. Now, currently, I'm using the touch on the Wacom tablet to move this cursor around. However, if I go over here and change this to precision mode, okay, now this still works. Okay. It didn't work the other day. Okay. So, all right. So I just changed this to precision mode. So now I have, this is my settings for Photoshop. Precision mode, open run, command, stroke, so forth. And then option, so these are the default settings, but I'm adding in precision mode, and I'm making this key, which has the little indent on it. That's why I choose it to open Lightroom 5. Okay, now what you want to do is go over here, and this is important. When you work on these settings, you kind of need to work from the top down. So, because sometimes if you're changing settings, for example, if I go back here to grip pen and I start making changes on the grip pen, it's going to affect all my applications. Well, I may want different settings for Photoshop than I do for Lightroom with the grip pen. So what I need to do is I need to add, I can add Photoshop CC, and then I can also add Lightroom. I would recommend opening Photoshop and Lightroom before you start configuring this, because then you don't have to go find the applications. Okay, so now I've got Photoshop and Lightroom in here for the pen. Okay, but for now I'm going to go back to, again, top down. So we go back to functions, and we don't have Lightroom in here, so I'm going to click on this and I'm going to add Lightroom 5 to the setup. Okay, now as far as the express keys, I want the same thing. I want precision mode over here, and I want this. Now, I don't want to open Photoshop. I want to do, well, let me show you here. If I go under the edit menu, okay, I just screwed this up. See, you notice edit in Photoshop CC is Command E, okay? So, what I do is I go here, and I'm going to make this be a keystroke. And I'm going to do Command E. And then I'm going to call this Edit in Photoshop CC, okay? So now we have precision mode and edit in Photoshop CC. So these are the settings that I use for Photoshop and Lightroom. Now, if I click on Lightroom, okay, and I click on Photoshop, okay, now they are working. I actually had problems. If you have problems where you lose your touch sensitivity with Photoshop and Lightroom, you can click on touch and add those programs in here. Okay, and then the other thing that I do is on the grip pen, Photoshop, I actually leave the default settings. Okay, but in Lightroom, I have the eraser set to shift, which allows me to select turn the pen around and select multiple photos with the shift key, because I almost never use the erase key. Normally what you're doing is you're using your erase. Oh, the other thing that I have set up is I find I don't need to double click in Lightroom. I can always double tap the pen to get a double click. But what I frequently like to do is the backslash key, so I make this a keystroke and click backslash, and then this is this shows you what your photo was like before you do any editing, and I find that to be very useful to look at my photo before and after my edits. So I have this set up to before. It doesn't work in Photoshop, so I don't have it set up that way. Okay? So anyway, these are the settings that I have for for Photoshop and Lightroom. Now, I will go into a couple other things. If you're in Lightroom, actually click here and then click here. On the touch ring, I've changed a few things here. There are no layers in Lightroom. So what I have this for, I have it on keystroke. And let's clear both of these. When I'm in Lightroom, I frequently switch between grid mode and develop mode. So G is grid mode and D is develop mode. And then you can type in here whatever you want. So I have grid up and develop down to remind me of this. Okay. Then over here, I leave brush size, and then on this one, I also set this to keystroke because I can rotate. You can actually rotate with touch. I never need to rotate my photos because I might need to crop my photo if it's tilted a little bit, but I don't need to rotate my photo. So what I do here is I use the back and forward keys. So I do left arrow and right arrow. So I can actually use this toggle, and I actually slow this down because otherwise I find if you move it, suddenly you've moved ahead 3 photos. So I slow that down a little bit. So now I've got in Lightroom, I have grid and develop on this key. I have leave brush size alone, and I do left and right to go forward and backward through my photos. Okay. The next thing I do is on the Radial menu. Some of this stuff, like the step backward and step forward, I don't need some of these things. So I can change these. So for example, step backward, you can change this to open run. Actually, no, I want to do keystroke. And I'm going to choose keystroke. And then the command that you want to use is photo edit in, okay, Color Effects Pro. So that's Control Command E, should be, or Option Command E. Clear. Option Command E. Okay, and now this is edit in color. I really can type here, folks. Color Effects 4. Okay. In fact, you can let's make this a little briefer. I like my words to fit here. All right. So anyway, you can see you can set up custom menus for certain things here. The other thing that I do, there's no brush panel, and so I make this in Lightroom, open run. Now this is important here. I do open run Photoshop. You have to make sure that you actually click on the program and not the folder. Okay. So so now we're going to do that. So now it's Open Photoshop CC. Okay. So now in actual use, and there are other, there's other little settings that you can tweak if you want, but these are the main settings. Now I'm going to show you something else very, very important. Once you have done this, what you want to do here is you want to go open up the Wacom tablet utility program. I didn't even know this existed. I called Wacom and they told me about this program. But anyway, you do a backup of all the settings that you've made. And you can call this whatever you want. I normally call this Wacom Preferences, but because I've already customized a more detailed set, I'm going to call this Wacom Preferences too. And you save this. Now, at any time, for example, if you put in the settings that I'm suggesting, you could save these and you can call them whatever you want, but you could call them, Nathan Smith settings or whatever. Then you could go and further customize it the way you want and change it and put your name settings. And that way you can go back to whatever your settings are, or if you get frustrated and you don't remember what I had suggested, you can go back, you can restore to my settings. You can also remove settings, which is what I did at the beginning of this tutorial. So hopefully that helps. Feel free to comment or send emails, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Greetings from Pisa, Italy, and we'll talk to you later.